Welcome to the Global Philosophy of Religion project at the University of Birmingham, led by Professor Yujin Nakasawa. We at Closer to Truth are pleased to participate. Eduard Shyfrin is an expert on Kabbalah, the ancient mystic tradition in Judaism. He is a scientist and entrepreneur with a PhD in physical chemistry and interest in science and religion from the perspective of information theory. He lives in London. Eduard, welcome. Let's
Thank you, Robert.
explore the nature of God by examining the Kabbalah and its esoteric teachings. First, let's start with a brief overview. What is Kabbalah?
Kabbalah is a deep meaning of the Holy Scripture. It's a teaching about the creation, its structure, its laws. It's a teaching about the interaction between the God and man. It's a teaching about the role of man in the creation. It's a teaching about the soul, life, death, and all to come. Talmudic sage of the second generation, Shimon Bar Yochai, put it this way, that Kabbalah is the soul of the Holy Scripture. Commandments are the body, and the story is the garment. He said, if Holy Scripture was just the story, we could have written better story. So that's it. Kabbalah is the soul of the Holy Scripture.
I've been impressed how Kabbalah has very deep metaphysical aspects to it that addresses some of the fundamental questions we ask even contemporarily. But what is the history of Kabbalah? When did it flourish? I think in the High Middle Ages. When did it develop? What's its role today? Very roughly and quickly.
Briefly, the Jewish mysticism was born together with Judaism. The basic book of Kabbalah, Sefer Yetzirah, the book of formation, by tradition is attributed to our forefather Abraham. At the beginning of the first millennium, another basic book was written, Sefer Abahir. It is attributed to the Rabbi Yuna ben Kahana. Kabbalah, in its original form, was born in Provence in beginning of the 13th century. The founding fathers was Rabbi Abraham ben David and Rabbi Isaac the Blind. From Provence, it moved to Spain, where it flourished. There were many schools of Girona, schools of Castile, and many outstanding Kabbalists. Among them, Joseph Gicatilla, Nachmanid, Rabbi Ezra, Rabbi Azriel from Girona, and many others. At the end of 13th century, Rabbi Moshe de Leon from Spain published the book Zohar, which is one of the main books of Kabbalah. He claimed that he found the script written by the Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, whom I mentioned before. After the expulsion of Jews from Spain, the center of Kabbalah thought moves to the northern Israel, to Safed. And here we have a number of prominent Kabbalists, among them Rabbi Yosef Karo, Moshe Cardavera, and finally Rabbi Yitzchak Luria Holy Ari, the author of the Lurianic Kabbalah. After that, the Kabbalistic tradition was carried forward by the Hasidic masters in Western Ukraine and Poland. The most outstanding of them is Rabbi Shneur Zalman from Ladi, the founder of the movement of Chabad Lubavitch.
Okay, that's very good. Let's go into the core foundation of Kabbalah in terms of its interpretation. You said that Kabbalah deals with interpretation of the Torah, the Holy Scriptures in Judaism, recognized by Christianity, of course. The first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible, sometimes called the 5 books of Moses. What are the levels of interpretation? I know the first, the Hebrew Parshat, meaning very just simple, literal interpretation of the meaning of the verses. But what are the 4 levels of ways of understanding the holy text of the Torah?
We believe The Torah has infinite amount of layers of understanding. There is no bottom here. By tradition, we talk about the four, which you have just mentioned. The straightforward meaning, hint, hermeneutical meaning, and secret meaning, thought. That's four levels of understanding. But again, I reiterate that we do believe that the number of meanings is endless.
Okay, well, we're not going to have time for all of the infinite number of meanings. We're going to try to get an understanding of the core concepts of Kabbalah. And as this series in the global philosophy of religion focuses on metaphysics, ontology, epistemology, I want to understand some of the key ways of thinking in Kabbalah. And this is not going to be comprehensive, I know, but let's just have an understanding of the core concept. So the first, as I've seen it, is the expression Ein Sof, which, in my very limited knowledge of Hebrew, means there is no end. And why? What is the meaning of that beyond the literal? And why is that a foundational concept for Kabbalah?
There is a dichotomy in Kabbalah. Almighty in relation to his creation and Almighty in relation to himself. The latter is not known to us. It's beyond the line of our comprehension. The nature, the essence, the only thing that we do know and believe that he exists. The Almighty in relation to the creation could be known through the Holy Scripture and prophecies. The term Ein Sof, that one which has no end, was coined by the Spanish Kabbalists, Azriel of Gerona and his teacher from Provence, Isaac the Blind. We cannot attach any attributes to Ein Sof. We cannot describe him. It's beyond the line of our comprehension.
So then, why is Ein Sof considered the foundation of Kabbalah? This concept that we have no capacity to understand the nature of the Creator.
Because he is the creator of everything. Everything starts with him. He is the first and he is the last. That's what we know through the prophecies.
In my cursory reading, I was interested in even the concept that with Ein Sof, there's no good and no evil. You can't even assign those kinds of categories, which is traditionally assigned in other religions.
We cannot, I reiterate, we cannot attach any kind of attributes, not only good and evil, to Ein Sof. Any. The division into the good and evil happens on the certain levels of creation, but not in Ein Sof, definitely.
Let's go on to the concept of Sifarot. These are, as I read, emanations of God. They relate to the creation of all reality, the universe, humans. What are they? Where do they come from? What do they do?
Sephirot are the emanations of Ein Sof through which he governs the creation. Every Sephirah has a concept attached to it. For example, Chokhmah, wisdom, Binah, understanding, Chesed, loving kindness, expansion, Gvura, judgment, might, and many others.
There are 10 of the Sifarot. Is that correct?
We call it tree of the Sephirot. Tree of the Sephirot. And to each of the Sephirah, it is important, the special name of Almighty is attached. On top of the concept, we have a name of Almighty attached to every Sephirah. Names.
Now, in hearing what some of them are, wisdom and such, they sound like attributes of God in other religious traditions, rather than, shall we say, energies that create things. they're emanations of God, but the character sounds like they are attributes of the Almighty or God, rather than elements that God has as a kind of a power generation.
Look, it's a matter of big debate in Kabbalah. The Sephirot belongs to the essence of Almighty, or they're just the tools. But in my view, Sephirot, they are the part of the informational space. They are the concept of the similar meaning, as I mentioned it already. For example, Hesed, it's a family of the concepts which represent loving, kindness, expansion. Gvura, it's a family of the concepts in the informational space which represent judgment, might.
How then to understand the Sepharot as essence of God or powers of God? Because the words themselves sound like they're attributes, as they would be used in other religious understandings of God.
There was a big debate about it in Kabbalah. In my view, it's not that important. As I mentioned it before, every Sephirot represents a certain concept. For example, Hesed, loving kindness and expansion. But it's not just one concept, it's a family of the concepts with a similar meaning. So every Sephirah, it's a part of the informational space which contains the family of the similar concepts. All these concepts then, in their turn, are the part of the real events in our world. That's how I see it.
I know you put great powers in the concept of information, and I want to get to that as a unifying concept. But let's deal with a couple of these other terms which can be a bit baffling. So the next one is partsufim, that apparently relate to the formation of the world.
The idea of Partsofim was put forward by the Rabbi Iskak Luria. It's a part of the Lurianic Kabbalah. Briefly, that means that each Sephirah contains 10 other Sephirot. And then among these 10 other Sephirot, each Sephirah again contains 10 Sephirot. Actually, it's a structure self-likeness. It's a fractal structure of the tree of Sphirot. That was the idea of Partsufim and of interaction between them. These are informational structures, self-liked. That's how I see the Partsufim.
And then finally, the Tzimtzum, if I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Correct.
The first act of creation, I think.
That was a radical idea, also put forward by Rabbi Iskak Luria. The essence of Tzimtzum is that in the presence of Ein Sof, nothing can exist. In order to give space for its creation, Ein Sof withdraw in itself. I'm speaking now straightforwardly, of course, and create the empty space, which is called Tehiru. In this empty space, Ein Sof emanated the ray of light, which we called Kav. And actually, this ray of light contained in itself the whole creation. That's a radical idea, but very important. We can draw many conclusions from the idea of Tzimtzum. I would like to mention three. First of all, Tzimtzum, it was a huge leap from absolute uncertainty to certainty. And if we assume the definition of information given by Claude Shannon, that's author of the theory of information, that information is a reduction of uncertainty. So the act of Tzimtzum was act of infinite reduction of uncertainty. And actually, it was an act of appearance of information. The second conclusion is that Tzimtzum represents the basic movement of creation. First compression, then expansion, pulsations. The third very important conclusion is that everything, the whole creation, was made out of ray of light. So hence there is no multiplicity in creation. There are no other building materials except the ray of light. I can touch it further on in the course of our discussion.
Good. Well, this is a perfect place to understand your innovation in Kabbalah in use of information theory. Your book on Kabbalah, which is titled From Infinity to Man, The Fundamental Ideas of Kabbalah Within the Framework of Information Theory and Quantum Physics. So I am sure neither information theory nor quantum physics was extant during the period of the Kabbalah formation in the High Middle Ages. So what is the Kabbalah of information? And your claim is, if I get this right, that the entire reality of our physical world can be described in terms of the Kabbalah of information.
Yes, that sounds quite ambitious, but that's true. But I always say that I just expressing my personal opinion. I never say that my opinion constitutes any kind of universal truth. Okay, back to Kabbalah of information. First of all, I would like to point out that Kabbalah was developed by the mystics. Unlike Jewish philosophers, mystics generally were not scientifically educated. And when we compare Kabbalah to science, we carry out clean experiment. We compare two absolutely independent theories. And if we manage to prove that they come to the same conclusion, then it's a very strong confirmation that they are right. Kabbalah is not a textbook on mathematics and physics. We will not find equations there. It is written by quite obscure language, hardly comprehensible by our contemporaries. Many notions of Kabbalah are not well defined. For example, the light, one of the main notions of Kabbalah. There is no vivid explanation what is the difference between Ein Sof and his light, and where is the border. There is no vivid explanation what is light. Definitely, it's not a physical light. One of the prominent Kabbalists of the Middle Ages, Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzata, explained it that way. We don't have a word to describe what is light. We feel it's something like godliness. Just we decided to call it light. This lack of definition, in my view, creates some confusion and uncertainty. I attempted to reformulate these ideas, first of all, in the language accessible to our contemporaries, and secondly, take it into account the body of knowledge, scientific knowledge, which is available to us today. As I mentioned it before, the Tzimtzum was a huge reduction of uncertainty, so appearance of information. At the beginning of the basic book of Kabbalah, Sefer Yetzirah, book of formation, it is said that God created the universe with the help of the 32 Pasuk wisdom. 32 means 22 letters of Hebrew alphabet and 10 numbers. We know very well that the letters and numbers, they are information of God. That's the basic idea of my theory, if we can call it theory, I don't know, is that at the beginning, he created information. And he didn't create anything else. He just shaped it, formed it. So at the basic of reality, we have information. There is no difference between spiritual, material, just information.
We at Closer to Truth have focused on information. In fact, we had a whole mini series on the nature of information and the claim in physics circles that information is the most fundamental thing in reality, that everything is composed of information, which is, as you know, controversial among physicists, but is a very legitimate position. When we did that, I must say I had no idea that the Kabbalah of information is also a candidate in this ultimate concept. So this is fascinating and very much relevant to what we do. I also like the idea that of this concept of reduction in uncertainty. That sort of echoes the first line or two of Genesis, Bereshit, where it talks about tohu and bohu, that there was this kind of chaos and confusion. And so a reduction on uncertainty is part of the creative process that God went through at the very beginning. And what you're doing is where light is used in this generic sense, because there was no other term at the time, to see how this reduction of uncertainty is occurring, you're using information.
Speaking in scientific language, it was a huge reduction in informational entropy, which was defined by Claude Shannon, the author of the information theory. I must admit that idea that information is at the basic of reality resonates with the ideas of the science of 20th century. This idea was pioneered by the one of the greatest mind, in my view, of the 20th century, John Archibald Wheeler, and his idea of participatory universe. But also one of the most outstanding Kabbalists of 12th century, Nachmanid. He said, at the beginning, he created primordial matter, and he didn't create anything else, just shape it and form it. Nachmanid didn't tell us what was this primordial matter, but the idea is clear. There is no multiplicity in creation. So we say this primordial matter is information. Using that, we can find answers to the many, many questions of science and Torah. Commandments, the informational commands. Sayings of Almighty, its informational instructions. Blessings and curses, that's opening and closing of the informational channels. We can present the whole creation and the whole informational space of concept with a hierarchical structure. We can do many things with that.
That's great, Eduard. I think we now have a foundational concept of the key ideas in Kabbalah. And what we'd like to do now is relate Kabbalah to the kinds of questions we ask in philosophy of religion, that in this Global Philosophy of Religion project, we are asking to all the major and other traditions in world religion. So I'd like to pose these questions, and based on what you've presented already, to get responses to these questions. So the first deals with the category, the first several, on the existence of God. And we always ask, what are the arguments? What are the good arguments for the existence of God? Is this part of the tradition to have these arguments? And are there within the community arguments against the existence of God? And did they conflict the way that we see contemporaneously? And some religious traditions have had this for a long time.
That's a very interesting question. There are certain arguments, and I will mention them. But actually, we should trust, we should believe that God exists. We are created entities. And as created entities, we cannot prove the existence of our creator. But there are arguments, of course. Let's say, take the famous anthropic principle. It says that more than 200 physical constants of our universe are suitable for life. And the insignificant change of any of the constants would make existence of life impossible. The question is why? Our answer is because Almighty did that. In scientific circles, the very popular idea is a multiverse, which says that we are lucky to be in one of the many universes, And due to the probability distribution of constants, we're just lucky we're in the right place. I don't accept it. First of all, the concept of multiverse has never been proved. Nobody has seen even the second universe, let alone multiverse. Second, nobody knows about the probability distribution of the constants. Third, even if we imagine that the multiverse exists, it just pushes question down the line. Then the question would be at who created the multiverse. For example, that's one argument. Let's take evolution. Evolution achieves its goal in polynomial time. It's much shorter period of time compared if it were a random process. That's only possible if, at a certain stage of evolution, somebody knows definitely what he wants to achieve. Otherwise, impossible. There are many arguments, but I can reiterate. As a creations, we cannot prove existence of the Creator 100%.
So in Kabbalah, what is the process where individuals can get to know God? Is this an intellectual process? Is it emotional, mystical?
Look, I would mention the phrase written by the famous, one of the greatest Jewish philosophers, Maimonides. He said, the love of God means it's our desire to know Him. And I fully agree with this. We were given information by God in Holy Scripture and in prophecies. So that gives an opportunity of knowing God. If you work hard, if you ask questions, if you try to find the right answer. That's it.
In Kabbalah tradition, what is the value of religious or mystical experiences in terms of the legitimacy of the whole Kabbalah project?
There are two kinds of Kabbalah. Theosophic Kabbalah deals with creation, with the theory of creation, of which our universe is just a small part. And there is an ecstatic Kabbalah. Ecstatic Kabbalah is about the meditation and mystical experience. There are different ways of meditation. On the letters of Hebrew alphabet, on the names of God, on the pictures of the tree of Sephiroth. There are different goals. First, it could be to reconnect with the, let's say, higher Sephiroth, with the intellectual Sephiroth, and to obtain some knowledge. The goal could be to draw down the certain powers. I don't work in the realm of the ecstatic Kabbalah. My area is theosophical Kabbalah. Ecstatic Kabbalah is just for the personalities, for the loners.
I completely both understand and empathize, because that's what close to the truth is. We often get criticism from some who say that our philosophical, analytic philosophy approach to religion misses the whole mystical and religious side, and therefore we'll never get to the truth. We'll always kind of be moving closer, maybe, but never get there. And I accept that critique. That's not what we do. That's not what I claim in terms of having mystical or religious experiences. So you and I are on the same side of that issue. I'd like to get to perhaps the biggest obstacle for all religion, which is evil, the problem of evil. Uh, what is evil? How is evil dealt with in Kabbalah? And how does that evil reflect the existence of God in the first place, or when you believe in God, the attributes of God?
Look, that's a very good question. But before we discuss the problem of evil, I think it would be logical to come up with a definition of what evil is.
Yeah.
And that is very difficult. There is no exhaustive definition of evil in the modern philosophy and science. Some contemporary philosophers even propose to abandon the concept of evil because of the lack of definition. And that's the problem. In Kabbalah, there are different notions describing evil. They are not very well defined. One of them is Sitra Achera, other side. Another one, it's Klipot, evil Klipot. They are not very well defined. Recently, I wrote an article on this problem, and I proposed, again, it's my personal opinion, quite a radical definition of evil, because I do believe, not knowing the definition, it's not possible to deal with the problem. We were given instruction by God how to live. These are 613 commandments of Torah. It is said in the Deuteronomy, choose good and life, and evil, or evil and death. These 613 commandments, these are 613 concepts in information space. There are anti-commandments, the same commandments with the addition of the don't. For example, love your neighbor, don't love your neighbor. Don't kill, don't kill. That means kills. So we have the two mirror spaces in the informational space of commandment and anti-commandment. This anti-commandment area, that's what I define like that Sitra Achra, the other side. And I put forward the definition that any kind of evil deed is a violation of at least one of the 613 commandments of the Torah. Second, there is no evil deed which is not connected with the violation of even one of the 613 commandments of Torah. That's a precise definition. Quite radical. I do not insist that it is right, but it's my opinion. And the proof is very simple. If we imagine that there is a certain evil act which is not connected to the violation of commandments, that means that the system of commandments given us by Almighty is incomplete.
Yeah.
And Almighty is not perfect, which is absurdity.
Okay, so given that definition, and that is a part of the philosophy of morality that is basically command ethics, where whatever God says is good, and whatever he says is evil or not good, it is such for that reason. Given that definition, how do you deal with the problem of evil? Because no one can deny the enormity of evil throughout history, continuing today, of course, with the concept of a perfect God who is all powerful, all knowing, and all good.
Look, I will not say something new, I'm afraid. Look, we are creatures with the freedom of choice. We are not angels. And the freedom of choice means that we have to choose between something. So between commandment and anti-commandment. But it's our choice. We may actualize anti-commandment, we may not. We were given instruction how to live. Imagine for a second that, let's say, all 7 and something billion of inhabitants of our planet tomorrow at let's say at 10 o'clock, will say, from now on, we stick in full to the 10 commandments forever. How our world would look like then? Will it be changed? I do believe yes. We know what to do. We were given an instruction. It's our fault that we don't stick to it. And also, it is a very well-known fact that the evil entered our world as a result of the violation of the commandment by Adam, by the first man. I see in it the confirmation of the definition of evil which I propose.
Do these issues of the problem of evil occur in Kabbalah intellectual history?
Of course, as I said, there is a notion of Sitra Achera, the other side. My interpretation is that this is the area of informational space which contains anti-commandment. Then there are evil klipot. Evil klipot, in my interpretation, is the embodiment of the concept of self. If we imagine the line, on one end of the line is self, on the other God, so if we in the position of self, we don't care about the God and commandments. So klipa pushes us to violate the commandments and enter the realm of the other side, ego and self. That's my interpretation of the Kabbalistic notions of klipa and sitra achera.
In Kabbalah, what is the approach to other religions beyond Judaism? Do they believe that other religions worship the same God in different ways? Or is the feeling that other religions don't worship the real God, and there is this tension always between a universalist point of view, a pluralist point of view, and an exclusivist point of view?
Look, there is no particular discussion in Kabbalah about other religions. There is a general attitude of Judaism. The general attitude is that the supreme being is one and the same for everybody. Even idolaters, they knew that there is only one supreme being. Just they saw that he delegated powers, for example, to planets, to stars, to idols, and other entities. But the supreme being is one and the same. Take the Hinduism, for example. On the surface, there are many gods there, yeah. But behind the lines, we can clearly see there only one supreme being. Greek philosophers like Plato, Aristotle, despite the fact that the Greek religion was polytheistic, also realized that the creator is one. The prime mover, like Aristotle put it forward. That's the attitude of Judaism. There is only one creator. There are different ways to him, of course.
Let's move on to the traits of God, the attributes. And the first question I always like to ask different religions is God, the supreme being, a person, a personal being with personhood features like awareness and intent and will?
I mentioned it in the beginning that there is a dichotomy. We are talking about the God as he expressed himself, the creation, or we are talking about the God as his essence, which is completely unknown to us, and so on. Of course, we read in Torah and in prophecies about the emotions of God, about the anger, delight, but that's the way God presented himself to us. It's not his essence. That's the position of Kabbalah. We have names of God. I told you about that. Every Sephirah has a name of God. For example, Tetragramon means mercy. Elohim means judgment. So we have different names in different parts of the Torah, dependent on the context. But again, we are talking about the God relative to his creation, as he presented himself to us.
So let's dig down a little bit in terms of these attributes, specific attributes that God possesses. And I'd like you to try to compare the God as Kabbalah sees God, as you've been describing it, with what's been called, particularly in Christian philosophy, perfect being theology, which has these terms often beginning with omni, meaning all, omnipotence, all powerful, omniscience, all knowing, omnipresent, present everywhere, omnibenevolence, all good, omni-free. How do these terms relate to the Kabbalah understanding?
There is no difference in opinion here. I don't see any. That the fact that Ein Sof is perfect is undisputable. And the Christians, they recognize Old Testament. The Old Testament and the Torah is one and the same, letter to letter. There is no argument here that God is absolutely perfect being in all his expressions, absolutely effective, efficient, omniscient, omnipotent. There is no difference.
How about the characteristics? And there is controversy in Christian philosophy about whether in God's own self, God is timeless and immutable, and what we call impassive, meaning cannot be affected. Um, and there's a great dispute within Christian philosophy about whether those are perfections, timelessness, immutability, impassivity, or whether God, in God's own self, does experience sequence of events, can change in ways, and can be affected, particularly by human experiences.
This question is very difficult. The position of Kabbalah, in my view, is, again, uh, forgive me for my often repetition, the position is that there is a dichotomy. The God presented himself to us as a personal God. He interferes in our affairs. There are many examples in Holy Scripture. He gives instruction to Abraham what to do and what not to do. He gives instruction to Moses. He hardened at the heart of Pharaoh. He appeared in a dream to Laban and telling him not to touch Jacob. Definitely he interferes. Yeah. We read about the anger of God, about his mercy and different emotions. That the way he presented to us, the Kabbalah call it lower knowledge. The high knowledge, again, it refers to the God in itself. And there, he is immutable and unaffected, of course. How it can exist in one and the same, let's say, God? It's a good question, but I would like to remind our viewers there is a logical system which is called dialetheism. It's a system about the contradictions. According to Kabbalah, God is immanent to the world and transcendent at the same time. That's dialetheism was developed at the end of the 20th century, and it's a very interesting line of a logical thought, which goes ahead there, one of the main tenets of the logic of law of non-contradiction. It's difficult to imagine, it requires a high level of abstractions, but in my view, that's the case.
No, that's an aspect of the sophistication of various religions, looking at the concept of what appears to us as contradictions, is actually, when speaking about the Creator, is a window of potential understanding. Let's talk about the actions of God. And a question I think that Kabbalah does address is, did God create ex nihilo, from nothing? You've focused on that as a way of understanding that the world certainly is created by God, Ein Sof, but is it created from nothing, and what would that mean?
Look, the concept of nothing ex nihilo, it's a widely accepted concept in Judaism and Christianity. Yeah, that's true. But I have to admit that that's a mind-bending concept. We cannot, for example, in Kabbalah, there was a lengthy discussion about nothing. What is nothing? Where is nothing? That is wrong in my view. We cannot pose question about nothing, any kind of question. We cannot ask where is nothing. We cannot ask what is nothing. We cannot even say that nothing is the absence of something, because in this case we attach absence to nothing. That's a radically mind-bending concept out of nothing. The concept of nothing is proved ad absurdum from the opposite. It goes like that. So if the world is created of something, then this something is created again of something, and we have infinite regress, which is wrong. If the world is created of something which was not created by God, it is absurdity, because everything is created by God. But I have to point out that proofs ad absurdum, they never explain the underlying mechanisms, never. And that's a deficiency of the proofs of ad absurdum. In my view, again, it is widely accepted concept out of nothing. But I tried to put forward the concept of information. What's interesting about the information is the law of non-contradiction formulated by Aristotle said that one and the same thing cannot be supported by the being of this thing and at the same time non-being of this thing. But information and absence of the information are one and the same. I say absence of information is also information.
The parallel question to whether God created the universe is whether God must sustain the universe. Is God necessary to be actively in the sustaining or creating process? I know you've focused on that the theory of continuous creation is one of the central concepts in Judaism, Kabbalah in specific, and it means that Ein Sof, God never stops creating, that even if the act of creating would stop for a single moment, everything would cease to exist and would dissolve back into Ein Sof. If that's right, I'd like to really dig down and understand the meaning of it.
We can approach this issue from two different directions. Of course, the continuous creation is one of the pillars of Judaism and Kabbalah. The creation exists in the thought of God, in the knowledge of God. And the moment he stops to know his creation means that it doesn't exist anymore. That's one approach. The second approach is, let's say, from scientific side. As I mentioned it, the first act of creation, Tzimtzum, was a huge reduction of uncertainty, a huge reduction of entropy. And we know from physics there is a second law of thermodynamics that in order to reduce entropy, to increase order, we need to do some work. A very simple example, the freezers. We want to cool the food. We have to do work, we have to supply electricity. The moment we stop, the temperature of the food will become equal with the temperature of the environment. It goes back. The same. So in order to reduce entropy, Almighty did certain work and should continue to do the work to keep the structure. The moment he stops, the entropy will go back to infinite, back to Ein Sof. That's another illustration of that, scientific.
Does God intervene in human affairs in Kabbalah understanding, in that does God violate the laws of nature? Miracles, answering prayer, those kinds of things.
The answer to the first question, yes, and there are many examples in Holy Scripture and in prophecies. God does interfere. If there is a creation, there is a plan. God is not contingent. And I will, within the frame of this interview, it doesn't make sense to mention all the examples there in the Holy Scripture. The second question is very important. I do believe that the question is structured wrongly. Laws of nature, they're also laws of God. So we should rephrase the question, does God violate his own laws?
Yeah.
That's absurdity, from my point of view. Secondly, when we say that God violates the laws of nature, it implies that we are aware of all the laws of nature and we are not. So how can we then say that something was violated if we are not aware of it? We don't know all the laws of the nature. My position is there is only one law which was established at the moment of creation, and with this frame of this law, everything can be done, and the God doesn't need to violate his own laws. That's absurd. There is a widespread belief and opinion that miracles are extra low probable events. That's so-called scientific explanation. That is wrong. Extra low probability is a necessary condition for the miracle, but not sufficient. I can give you an example. It's very well-known example. The monkey hits the piano randomly. There is a minuscule probability that it plays the invention of Bach, for example. Is it a miracle? My answer is no. It's an extra low probable event, and it might happen randomly at any moment of time, let's say within the time frame of 100 billion years. Miracles, on the other hand, they happen in the right place, in the right time, and on the purpose. So my definition of miracle is that it is an extra low probable event which happens in the right time, in the right place, and with a purpose. In order to perform miracles, no one laws of nature, so-called, should be violated. The question is, our ability to perform miracles is limited by our informational capabilities. If, for example, we had the informational storage and possibilities of manipulating molecule by molecule, we could have performed miracles. But our informational capabilities of Almighty are unlimited. That's it. So the answer is no. God doesn't violate the laws of nature, and I don't accept the concept of the laws of nature.
Yeah, your approach of using information in that capacity, I guess, with some hints of quantum physics and the probabilistic nature of it, is an interesting approach to that God does intervene, but does not violate the ultimate laws of nature.
Robert, I'm sorry, I don't accept the phrase laws of nature.
Okay. But you don't accept it because we don't know it, or because those are
Because
laws
because the phrase laws of nature could be reduced to the phrase law of God, and that is irreducible. Because God established what we call laws of nature.
Okay. In Kabbalah, should religion in general, or should the approach of religion explaining the relationship between humans and the Creator be universalist with respect to salvation, in that ultimately all individuals, whether they're embodied souls or spirits or whatever the ultimate sense is, will all individuals ultimately be redeemed, or in whatever the religious tradition is, be saved or participate in the ultimate reward? Does Kabbalah have a universalist approach, or is it an individual approach where some will make it and some won't?
First of all, the brief answer that some will make it, some may not. The brief answer. But the question itself is very complicated. In the 5 books of Moses in the Torah, almost nothing is said about the afterlife, about the Gehinnom and Gan Eden, paradise and hell. Nothing. We have some information from the prophecies. There is no unanimous opinion how everything will be unfolded. But in general, the position of Kabbalah is that the soul after death must be cleaned in what they call Gino. And then it enters Gan Eden, like a paradise, but temporarily. Then there will be, Messiah will come, there will be resurrection of the dead, and then there will be a world to come, which is completely different story. And in the world to come, some will make it there, some may not. But this is a very, very, let's say, obscured concepts, or the information is, let's say, very, very parsimonious, about that. It's a point of many speculations. But the position is that not everybody will make it there.
Okay, let's move on to our last category, which is one of the favorite of Closer to Truth, which is the deep metaphysics, the ontology of religion. And where we like to start is to ask the question, what is ultimate reality? And a specification of that question is the question, short question, but very powerful, what exists? And by this we mean, what are the fundamental, non-reducible categories of all reality?
Look, that's a really very, very good and fundamental questions. I'm afraid I'm too attached to the word definition. I'm afraid. But before we discuss existence, it would be great to give a definition. What is existence?
Yeah.
Is existence absolute or relative or subjective? That's a big question. Some people say something exists objectively. What does that mean? That means that it would have existed even if we were not there. Okay, but according to Kabbalah, the purpose of creation was the man. So if we were not there, there would have not been any kind of creation. Nothing would have existed. We can put it this way. There is a very important passage in the Torah, in the Bereshit, which says that God didn't send the rain to earth since there was no man to plow it. Straightforward meaning is clear. But the Kabbalistic meaning is, until the man was created, the summit of the purpose of the creation, there was no real creation. That's a position. So it's a very difficult issue. Can something exist independently of us if we do not exist? My position is cannot, because if do not exist, the creation wouldn't have been exist. That's it.
And subsequent to the creation, how fundamental is the creation? So does that have an existence, a sustenance in itself that would legitimatize it being a fundamental category?
What I've just said resonates with the theory of John Archibald Wheeler of the participatory universe, that the man shaped the universe. It's a very interesting theory. It is not accepted by everybody, but it has sense. Again, I can reiterate that existence doesn't make sense if we do not exist. That's a position of Kabbalah and Judaism, because we were the purpose of all this existence and creation. That's it. Why did Almighty created the world? The honest answer is we don't know. There are many versions and interpretations. No one has been proved. The honest answer, we don't know.
Eduard, in this final section, what I'd like to do is pose some very specific questions that we ask on Closer to Truth and in the Global Philosophy of Religion project, and want to get the Kabbalah approach to it. So we'll start with the nature of causation. Is there anything in causation that is beyond material existence?
First of all, I do not discern between material and spiritual. As I mentioned it before, there is no, at the basics, there is no difference. It's all information, different shapes. As far as causation is concerned, in science, there are so-called Markovian processes. That means that any event is determined by the preceding event, and the history doesn't count. There are non-Markovian processes where every event is determined by the whole history of previous events. But there are certain type of processes which are determined by the goals in the future, the process governed by the backward causation.
In Kabbalah, does God himself need to be part of the causation process, or has the system been worked out where it can function completely on its own?
Definitely, the God is an inseparable part of causation process since there is a plan. The most vivid example is the prophecy given to our forefather Abraham. God told him about the future exile of Jews into the Egypt. At the time of the prophecy, these Jews were not yet even have been born.
Yeah.
But they didn't have any choice already. They have to be exiled. That's the process, the example of the backward causation. There are many examples of backward causation.
Okay. What's the nature of space and time? Are they just created elements that Ein Sof God did?
I mentioned it when I described the process of Tzimtzum, that Tzimtzum introduced the basic motion of the creation: expansion, contraction, pulsations. So the time is fundamental. That's the pulsations, informational pulsations. Space and the distance, it's a derivative of information. The distance determines the informational space by the difference in meaning of the concepts. The same concept have zero distance. The more the difference is, the bigger the distance. At a certain critical distance, informational interaction stops. There are many examples. In our, let's say, space, at a certain distance, I cannot use tactile informational exchange. At a certain distance, we lose hearing. At a certain distance, we lose eyesight. We cannot exchange through what we can see, and etc. That's it.
What is the nature of consciousness in Kabbalah thinking? In some religious traditions, consciousness is primordial. It is the fundamental aspect. In other religious traditions, consciousness is fundamental, but that it's sort of produced or related to a god or godlike figure. So in Kabbalah, what is the role of consciousness?
One of the main tenets of Kabbalah is that our soul mirrors the tree of the Sephirah. We are created in the image and likeness of Almighty. That's a passage from the Holy Scripture. And since we are the mirror of the tree of the Sephirah, so that means that we have Chokhmah, wisdom, we have Binah, understanding. So, according to Kabbalah, the consciousness definitely is not in the brain. There is a so-called hard problem of consciousness formulated by the philosopher Chalmers. It sounds like how come that physical process in the brain, firing of the neurons, create qualia, the thoughts. In my view, and in the view of Kabbalah, this problem is formulated wrongly. It's a vice versa. The consciousness is not in the brain.
Eduard, you have focused on the relationship between science and religion, which many philosophers, theologians, scientists even have also done. But you come at it from a different point of view, with the primacy of information being a way to understand the relationship between science and religion. How does that work? Take me through the way of thinking.
Thank you very much. It's a good question. The authors in the field of science and religion often come in for criticism that knowing the scientific fact makes it easier to find analogies in the Holy Scripture, and not vice versa. Up to a point, this criticism is fair. I attempted, okay, again, it's my personal opinion, to do the opposite, to give some prediction for the modern science based on the Kabbalah, or If you allow me, I will mention some of them. Our basics physical theories allow for the time reversal. They are time reversal invariant. But their time reversal actually have never been observed. The Kabbalah, the prediction of Kabbalah is time is irreversible. Nature of space-time. According to the relativity theory, space-time is a continuum. According to the quantum physics and theory of quantum gravity, space-time is discrete. The prediction of Kabbalah is space-time is discrete. There are three models of the temporal structure of the universe. First one is a presentism, only present exists. Second one is possibilism, only past and present exist. And third one, the block universe. Future, present, and past exist. The third model is confirmed by relativity theory and implies backward causation. Prediction of Kabbalah, it is a block universe. According to relativity theory, in the center of the black hole, there is a point of singularity. That means that the point of the breakdown of everything, of physical laws, of space, of time, matter, energy, everything. According to the theory of quantum gravity, there is no singularity there. Prediction of Kabbalah, there is no singularity. One of the main conditions for the singularity is the maximality of space-time. That means that the space-time should not be the part of some bigger space-time. That doesn't hold. According to Kabbalah, our space-time is just a small part of the whole space-time of creation. So there is no singularity. Quantum physics is probabilistic by nature. There is a big debate. This probability are ontological property of reality or just a convenient tool for calculations. Kabbalah takes position of Albert Einstein. God doesn't play dice. There is no probability for God. That means the quantum physics is very good and useful theory, but it doesn't reflect the deep ontology of realities. There are some other predictions which we can make.
I should tell you, I have kind of a skeptical eye that opens wide when I hear ancient religious traditions seeing echoes or hints of quantum physics often in their writings. I hear this in certain aspects of Hinduism. I see that in the Muslim world with the Quran, that people see things built in there, a numerology, even in Judaism in certain circles in terms of the Bible. So I'm sure you would understand my skepticism in reading back modern understandings, quantum physics, relativity, into ancient scriptures.
Look, Robert, again, we don't have a concept of space-time or block universe in Kabbalah. But we do have a concept of pulsations. And pulsations means discrepancy. For example, we don't have the concept of quantum physics in Kabbalah. I never say this. But we have a concept that there are no probabilities for God. We don't have a concept of maximality as is formulated in physics of space-time. But we do know from Kabbalah that our universe is just a small part of the whole creation. So the maximality doesn't hold. That's what we have. I try to be very clear here.
Well, this has been terrific, Eduard. I really enjoyed it. In my Judaic upbringing, I should say that Kabbalah was not part of it. So I've been enlightened. I really appreciate our conversation. I would look forward to engaging more. I know we've just touched the bare surface of the literal meaning, and there are many other levels below that we can explore. So I look forward to this being the beginning of our conversations.
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity. It's an honor for me, and for the good question which you have asked.